Hello, this is Prepositions Live Class number 9. My name is Kathy, and today we will be talking about some prepositions and different situations where we can use those prepositions. If you have any questions during the class, you can move your mouse around until you see this icon that says chat. And when you click on the chat icon, it will open a white rectangle like this. At the bottom is a place for you to type your question. And when you hit enter on your keyboard, I will be able to read your question, and I will be answering questions at the end of the lesson today. Let's get started with our first preposition. Our prepositions today are before, after, across, and against, and they have a few different meanings. Before can mean during the period of time preceding an event or a time. Before can also mean in front of. After can mean during the period of time after an event or time, or it can mean behind. Across can either mean from one side to the other side of a place, or from one side to the other side of an area, some place or area that has boundaries. Across can also mean expressing position in relation to an area. And against, there are several meanings of against. Against can mean in opposition to. It can mean in anticipation of, or in preparation for a problem or a difficulty. It can mean supported by or colliding with a person or an object. Or against can mean in contrast to. Now, just looking at these words by themselves, I think that's very confusing. But I think that once you see the pictures and the examples, it's going to be much easier for you to understand. Let's look at our first example. Okay. Before can mean here during the period of time preceding an event. Okay, so that's what we're going to do first, is a period of time preceding an event. Pierre drinks a cup of coffee every morning before he goes to work. So when is he drinking his coffee? He's drinking it before something else happens. He's drinking it before he goes to work. That's before an event. During the period of time preceding an event. So the first thing that happens is the coffee, and the next thing that happens is going to work. So he is drinking the coffee before he goes to work. And if we look at our next slide, this one is a period of time preceding another time. So this is Pierre drinks a cup of coffee every morning before 8 o'clock. And so instead of before an event, before he goes to work, now we're saying before a particular time. So here he is drinking his coffee before 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, the next example. This one is meaning in front of, and this is uncommon. I don't think it is very usual for people to use the word before to mean in front of. She stands before the mirror to brush her hair. So she stands in front of the mirror. Here she is, and here is the mirror, and she is standing so that she can see her face in the mirror. She is before the mirror, in front of the mirror. I could say that someone stands up before the class, meaning in front of the class. Or I gave a presentation before my company. I stood up in front of everyone in my company and I gave a presentation. But in those cases, I think that people would be more likely to say in front of. She stands in front of the mirror to brush her hair. You can use the word before, but I think that might be a more old-fashioned use of the word before. The more common would be before he goes to work or before 8 o'clock. Those are more common uses for before. In the same way, after can mean after an event, it can mean after a time, or it can mean behind. So here we're saying Sierra walks her dog every day after work. So it's after an event. First she does work and then she does walking her dog. There's two different events, two different actions. And one happens first and the other one happens after. So she walks her dog every day after work. Or we can, instead of after an event, we can say after a time. Sierra walks her dog every day after 6 p.m. So it was after an event. This one is after a particular time, after 6 p.m. And then we will see an example here, meaning behind. And again, this is not as common. When Angela leaves for work, she is careful to close the door after her. I think most people would probably say behind. She closes the door behind her. It is possible and it is correct English to say after her, but it's not as common. The most common uses of after is something that is happening during a period of time after an event or after a time, like walking your dog after work or walking your dog after 6 p.m. Those are the common uses for the word after. Okay. Now we're moving on to the next preposition. The next preposition is across. Across. Across can either mean going from one side to the other side of a place or an area that has boundaries. That's the first example that we're going to use, is going across from one side or the other side of a place or an area. And let's see here. So if this is one side of the bridge and over here is the other side of the bridge, and if I say that the car drove across the bridge, the car started on one side and it went to the other side of the bridge. And the bridge has a beginning and the bridge has an end. So you can go across the bridge from one side to the other side. And we know that this is one side and we know over here is the other side because there are boundaries. The bridge has a beginning and the bridge has an ending. So you can go across the bridge. In the same way, you can drive across the city because the city has a beginning and the city has an end. Or you can go across the country because your country has a beginning and your country has an end. So you can drive from one end of the country, the beginning of the country, all the way to the other side of the country and go across, to drive across the country. Here is another example. The horse carried the man across the river. So we can't see the beginning, but over here, there is a beginning of this river. And then if you keep going in this direction, there will be an ending to the river. And the horse is going across the river from one side all the way to the other side. So from one side to the other side, he carried the man across the river. This is a less common use, but it's possible. Here he is waving his hand to say, hello, hello. So he waved across the room to his friend. He is on this side of the room, and his friend is over near where the camera is. His friend is on the other side of the room. So from one side of the room where this boy is to the other side of the room where his friend is, he's waving across the room. at his friend. And then this one is very common, to walk across the street. You start on one side of the street and you go to the other side of the street. Walk across the street. Now here, this is an example using expressing position in relation to an area. This right here is one road, and this right here is another road. And the school and the bank are, this one school is on this side of the road and the bank is on this side of the road. And it says the school is across the street from the bank. The bank is not doing like these girls were doing. The bank is not starting here and the bank is going across the street to the other side. The bank is not moving. The school is not moving. Neither one of them is going across the street. What we are saying is that the school is located across the street from the bank. So here, no one, the top one is moving, and the bottom one, no one is moving, but we're expressing a position in relation to. So here is the bank, and where is the school? If I'm at the bank, the school is across the street. If I look to the other side of the street, then I will see the school. It is across the street. I'm expressing the position of the school in relation to the bank. The school is across from the bank. It is across the street from the bank. But the school is not moving and the bank is not moving. We're just telling the position of the school in relation to the position of the bank. The school is across the street from the bank. Okay. All right, against. I have a lot of examples for against because against has 4 different possible meanings. Against can mean in opposition to, and we're going to see some examples of that first. Against can mean in anticipation of or in preparation for a problem or a difficulty, and we're going to see some examples of that second. Against can mean supported by or colliding with a person or an object, and we'll have some examples of that. And the last thing, against as a preposition, can mean in contrast to. So let's look at the first definition. Against meaning in opposition to. When you are in opposition to someone or something, opposition is kind of like fighting against. I say no to that. You say yes, and I say no. I am opposed to that. And so we are on opposite sides from one another. And so here is an example of a football team that is in opposition to another football team. These football teams, they are not going to fight each other. They're not going to hit each other with fists, but they are going to play a football game where one will be the winner and one will be the loser. So it is a little bit like a fight. It says our football team will compete against our rival team today. So this football team and this football team are competing against each other. They're in a competition, and this team will win or this team will win. And they have to compete to see who will be the winner. And a rival team, your rival is the biggest enemy that you have. So in the United States, maybe this football team is from one school and this football team is from another school. Each football team will play many, many different schools, but usually there is one particular school that that you all really, really, really want to beat. It is the most important team that you want to win against because for some reason they are like your enemy and you really want to beat them. So this football team is competing against their rivals, against the people that they really want to beat, and they're competing against one another. So here is another example of being in opposition to one another. It says children suffer when one country goes to war against another country. So one country is fighting in a war against another country, and the poor children are stuck in the middle, and they have to live in a place where they see things like this car that is destroyed. So they are in opposition to each other. They are fighting with one another. Here is another example of being in opposition to something. I voted against the proposal because I believe that the factory would bring too much pollution to our city. So if I don't like something and I don't want that thing or that person to win the election, then I will vote against. I will be in opposition to that thing. And in this case, people are voting whether a factory should come to their town or the factory should not come to the town. And this person in the example believes that the factory will cause a lot of pollution, and so they don't want the factory to come to their town, and they voted against. They voted against the proposal. Okay, here is an example of being in anticipation of or in preparation for a problem or a difficulty. Many people have taken vaccines against COVID-19. So this person is trying to prepare for COVID. They are in anticipation of, they have the idea, I'm waiting because I think this is going to happen. I think COVID is going to be common in my city again. So I will go and have a vaccination. I will have a vaccine against COVID-19 to fight the COVID-19. And I'm taking the vaccine against COVID because I am trying to prepare for something that would be a problem. Because if I don't take that vaccine, the COVID could cause a big problem for me. I could die, or I could be very sick and lose my job. So this is the example of being in anticipation of. That kind of means waiting for something to happen, or in preparation for, getting ready for something to happen that would be a problem or a difficulty. Now we're going to see an example of supported by or colliding with a person or an object. The woman put the ladder against the wall so she could paint. Here the ladder is supported by the wall. If the ladder was not touching the wall, the ladder would fall down. So the ladder is supported by the wall. The wall is helping to hold the ladder in place. So the ladder is against the wall because the ladder is being supported, being held up, being held in place by the wall. The woman put the ladder against the wall so she could paint. Similarly, here it says the woman fell asleep with her head against her friend's shoulder. So her head is supported by her friend's shoulder. The shoulder here, this part of the woman, her shoulder, is what's holding up the other woman's head. If she was not there, the woman would, her head would just fall. She would fall. But instead, because her friend's shoulder is there, she can lean down and have her head on her friend's shoulder, and the shoulder will support her head. So the ladder was supported by the wall, and here, this woman's shoulder is supporting her friend's head while she is sleeping. Now this one is showing colliding with. When two things collide, they bump into each other. And so this says that the player in blue, this player right here, struck his shoulder against the other player's stomach to make him drop the ball. So the shoulder is this part here that's circled in blue. And here is the stomach. So this person in blue, he put his shoulder against the stomach of this player. His shoulder, you can't really see it because it's covered up by his head, but his shoulder is hitting this player in the stomach. And that made the player in green drop the ball. They collided against one another. His shoulder collided against the other player's stomach. They smashed into each other. Let's see another example of that. Another example of being colliding with something, not supported by, but colliding with something. It says the child accidentally bumped against the table and spilled the milk. When we don't see the spilling part, now we see the cleaning up part. But the child bumped against the table. The child and the table bumped into one another. And when the table moved, the milk fell over and the milk spilled. So the child bumped against the table. He collided with the table. He bumped against the table. So you can see that in the example here with the ball, it's colliding with a person. This person is colliding with another person. In this one, the child is colliding with an object. He's colliding with the table. He's bumping into an object, and the milk gets spilled. And then the last example of against has to do with being in contrast to. In contrast to. The flowers look so colorful against the bright blue sky. The flowers look colorful against the bright blue sky. So I can look here and I can see the pink and the green, and I think that the pink and the green look especially pretty because there is this beautiful blue that is behind them. They are against the blue sky. Let me show you another example. And this example shows that it matters what you hold something against. Okay, if I have this kind of blue writing, it says the writing is difficult to see against the blue background. It is much easier to see the writing against the yellow background. So I can take this blue writing, and if I put that blue writing against a blue background, that makes it kind of hard to see. If we were to move back, far away, it would be hard to tell what that writing said. But the yellow and the blue are opposite each other enough that it is easy to see this blue when you put the blue in front of the yellow. And so when the blue is against this yellow background, then it is easy to see. And they are in contrast to. Contrast talks about being different from one another. These two are not very different from one another. And so it is hard for me to see this blue writing when this blue writing is compared to the blue that is the background. It is easier for me to see this blue writing when it is in contrast to the yellow background. Those are very different from each other. These are a little bit different. These are very different. And since this one is only a little different from one another, that makes it difficult to see. because these have a big contrast and they are very different from one another, it makes it easier to see the writing. So the writing is difficult to see against the blue background. It is much easier to see the writing against the yellow background. So this is using against, meaning in contrast to. So 4 different meanings for against. Let's look at the review here. And again, when we look at it with just these words, it seems like so many words and a little bit hard to understand. But if you can picture in your mind the examples that we talked about, I bet you will find it easy to understand each of these meanings. Before, during the period of time preceding an event. So the person did something before work, before an event. Another example that we didn't show a picture of, but we could say is I have to send out invitations before the party. First, I mail the invitations to people, and then the party happens. So something happens during the period of time preceding an event, before the event, before work, before the party. Or we can pick a time. The person was drinking coffee before 8 o'clock in the morning. Before a time, preceding a time. We said that before could also mean in front of, but we said this one was not so common anymore. Like standing before the mirror or speaking before the class. And instead of before, I think most people would say now in front of, stand in front of the mirror to speak in front of the class. But you might see somewhere someone has written, he spoke before the class, or I'm nervous to give the presentation before my company. So the opposite of before is after. After meaning during the period of time after an event. So remember, she walked her dog after work. That was the event. Walking the dog happened in the period of time after the event of going to work. Or we gave an example of during the period of time after a particular time. So she walked the dog after 6 p.m. Maybe she walked the dog at 6:01. Maybe she walked the dog at 6:30. Maybe she walked the dog at 8 o'clock. We don't know exactly how long after 6 p.m., but we know that it wasn't 5:30 because 5:30 is not after 6 p.m. That's before. Okay, so across was the next preposition that we had. And we said that across can mean going from one side to the other side of a place or an area. And that place has to have boundaries. If you don't have the beginning and the ending, then you can't go from one side to the other side. And you don't have to always be able to see the boundaries. We had a bridge, remember? And you could see the beginning of the bridge and the ending of the bridge. And you went from one side of the bridge to the other side of the bridge that was going across the bridge. But I also said it's possible to go across the country. If I am standing in California, I cannot see all the way across the country to Florida or to New York or to Washington, D.C. I cannot see that far. I can't see the other side, but I can still travel from one side to the other side because there is a stopping point. There is a beginning and there is an ending to the country. So I can go across the country. We said you can go across the street. You can go across the river. You can walk across the room. You can go across anything that has a beginning and an end. If you start at one side and you go all the way to the other side, that is going across. Okay, and then the next meaning of across was expressing position in relation to something. And this was where we said there's a school and a bank, and the school is not moving across the street, and the bank is not moving to walk across the street. But we say, well, where is the school? Right now I'm standing at the bank. How do I find the school? The school is across the street from the bank. If I'm at the bank and I look to the other side of the street, that is where the school is. They are across the street from one another. The relationship of the school is across the street from the bank. So the position of the school in relation to the bank. Across from. The school is across from the bank. Maybe I could say my friend lives across the street from me. Or I could even say, if my friend lives far away, my friend lives across the country from me. Where is my friend in relationship to me? Here I am in Ohio, and my friend is far away from me. You have to travel to the other side of the country, to California, to get to my friend. So you have to go across the country. My friend lives across the country from me. And the person lives there. They are not traveling to me. I am not traveling to them. I'm just talking about the position of my friend in relation to my position. My position is in Ohio, and my friend's position is in California, and that is across the country from me. Okay, against, we said against can mean in opposition to, kind of like fighting against, whether your fighting is on a sports team where everybody's having fun, but one person is against the other, whether your fighting is an actual war, whether your opposition is by voting something and saying no to something because you don't like whatever it is that is being voted on. Those are about being in opposition to something. The next one, in anticipation of a problem or a difficulty, or in preparation for a problem or a difficulty. And we had the example of taking a vaccination against COVID-19 to prepare for the problem or the difficulty of COVID-19. We are going to have a vaccination to help us so that we will not have COVID-19 if it comes to our city, if it becomes very popular in our city again. Against can mean supported by. Something is holding something else in place. The ladder was supported by the wall. The woman's head was supported by her friend's shoulder. Supported by, held in place by. Or we had colliding with a person or colliding with an object. One of the players collided. He hit really hard against another player. So they bumped against one another. Or the boy bumped into an object. He bumped against the table. They collided. They crashed into each other. And then lastly, against, meaning in contrast to. So when we said that the flowers looked so beautiful against the sky, we were comparing the flowers and saying next to that other pretty color, they look very nice next to each other. We had some blue writing that was hard to see when it was against a blue backdrop, but we could see it much easier when it was against a yellow backdrop. In contrast to. And just quickly, I had a question, and I kind of thought I might get this question, so I'll see if I can answer it really quickly. Someone was asking about voting. And when we vote in the United States, no, our voting ballot does not look tiny, tiny, tiny like that. We used to vote by taking something that was like a pencil, and you would poke a hole in the paper, and then a machine would scan and figure out where the holes were on the paper. And that caused a problem because sometimes when you tried to push a hole into the paper, it didn't work very well. And then they changed. So now what we do when we vote is if you want candidate number one, I didn't put names. You want candidate number 1 or 2 or 3. If I wanted candidate number 2, I would color this in with a pen, and then there's many other things I would vote on, and I would color all of them with a pen to show which which ones I wanted to vote for. And then I take my paper over to a machine and the machine scans it. It kind of takes a picture of that to put it into a computer to count who was the person or what was the yes or the no that I voted by coloring the circles on my paper. Some places in the United States had tried to do voting instead of me coloring on a piece of paper and then putting it into a machine. They had people try to vote on computers, but then it was a problem with somebody trying to break into the computer and change everyone's votes. So no, voting doesn't look exactly like that in the United States. I'm not sure I did such a great job in a quick time to explain it. But you can vote for something or you can vote against it. And that brings us to the very end of the lesson today. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this live class about prepositions, and I hope that you can be part of the next live class from CINCILINGUA. Thank you so much.